properly, or okay. And then I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and back to here.
Eric, are
Yes.
the 10 big ideas still on ECO's homepage?
Yeah, they're not on the homepage, but they're on milwaukee.gov/climate plan.
Okay,
And I will talk about them today.
cool, awesome. Because I wanted to be able to be like, go here.
Yes.
And I thought that they, I don't know, I remember them being on ECO's page, so maybe I was wrong.
No,
That's why
you
I'm
are.
glad
I mean, you
of
can
that.
get to them from. You can get to them. I'll put the link in the chat.
Okay.
I'm looking to see if I have any email. Is that Pam? Must be Pam. Let me see here. Oh, it's Peggy. Oh, good.
Hi.
Hi, Peggy. Peggy, do you want to change your name so that you identify yourself as president?
I had to remove it. I got made fun of it in another Zoom that president was irrelevant. Asked if I was trying to stage a coup.
Okay. Okay.
Wait a second. I'm not seeing mine now. I don't see.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can make you I'm making you a co-host. Okay, so you're a co-host now, Peggy.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes any difference in what you see. So right now we have 26 participants. Oh, we have chat. Ah, great. Before we start, are there any action items that, well, yeah, I don't think we want to do that now. Shall we begin?
It's 7 p.m.
7 p.m. Okay.
All right. Welcome. My name is Peggy Creer. I'm president of the League of Women Voters in Milwaukee County. Most people know the League for its voter registration work, but from the League's founding in 1920, its mission was about more than that. It was to encourage active and informed participation with government. And of course, that extends beyond just voting. So citizens' ongoing involvement with government officials is important. So the League has always engaged in nonpartisan advocacy in the public interest. We advocate based on positions adopted by our membership after a process of careful study and member consensus. The choice of issues is based on the interests of our grassroots membership. Voting rights is a constant, of course. But we have a very active Natural Resources Committee, which is our host for tonight's program. And they've been very involved in advocating for water quality issues and for infrastructure investment most recently. So we invite you to become a member. We're open to everyone, including men and students, and or to donate to support our mission to empower voters and defend democracy. And with that, I will turn the program over to Vice President and Co-Chair of our Natural Resources Committee, Ann Battiza.
Well, thank you, Peggy. I also want to welcome everyone to our forum tonight on the Milwaukee City-County Climate and Economic Equity Plan. This forum was conceived by Carol Diggeman, who is a co-chair of our Natural Resources Committee in the League. As described by the March 2020 preliminary report on this plan, the City-County Task Force on Climate and Economic Equity was created in November of 2019 for the purpose of making recommendations on how to address three major issues: the ongoing climate crisis, to ensure Milwaukee meets its obligations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and to mitigate racial and economic inequality through green jobs. So the task force is comprised of appointees from 13 different organizations. I'm just going to mention a few of them. Both the City of Milwaukee Common Council and the County Board of Supervisors have members on the task force. The Sierra Club, the NAACP, the City of Milwaukee Youth Council, and Cream City Conservation, and many other organizations have contributed members to the task force, some of whom you see here tonight, along with the leaders. So the task force has work groups on greenhouse gas emissions and reduction strategies, on jobs and equity, on finance and funding, and education and community outreach. And tonight, you will hear from the manager of the task force, Erick Shambarger, and from co-chair Alderman Nick Kovac and co-founder State Assembly Representative Supreme Moore Omakunde, and from some of its members. We hope that Attorney Pam Rittger de la Rosa will be joining us, as well as WEAC Director Ted Craig tonight. Back in 2015, and Ted has said that he would be joining us a little late. Back in 2015, when Erick Shambarger became the director of the Environmental Collaboration Office, he said, sustainability should be embedded in everything we do as a government, as homeowners, and as businesses. At that point, he had already spent 13 years working in city government, 5 years as deputy director of this group, and as a city economist in the budget and management division. He holds a Master of Public Affairs degree from the University of Wisconsin and certificates in water technology and energy analysis and policy. Erick Shambarger has shown extraordinary leadership in developing multiple programs for homeowners, businesses, transportation, and government that sustain our environment while developing Milwaukee's economy. He coordinates Milwaukee's involvement with local, national, and global partnerships on environmental sustainability and oversees all environmental collaboration offices programs, many of which you're going to hear about tonight, as he discusses the City-County Climate and Economic Equity Plan, for which he is the project manager. After this presentation by Erick about the plan and brief introductions of our panelists by Louise Petering, the audience will participate in a Q&A. Please welcome Erick Shambarger. Erick?
All right. Thank you, Ann, for that very kind introduction. I'm excited to be here with you all tonight, and especially with Alderman Nick Kovac, who chairs the task force, and now State Representative Supreme Moore Omakunde, who was instrumental when he was on the county board on getting this task force started. So I'm just grateful to be able to work with them and their leadership in putting this together. So with that, I will attempt to share my screen, and we can get into the presentation here. Is that coming through all right?
Yes, it's good.
So just a little bit about our office. We are the Environmental Collaboration Office within the City of Milwaukee's city government. And we run many programs, as Ann mentioned. Some of the ones that are most related to climate are our Milwaukee Shine Solar program that helps homeowners install solar on their homes, but also on city government buildings. And we try to create a policy environment that's better for solar in general. The ME2 program helps homeowners save on their energy bills by providing loans and incentives to do things like insulation and new furnaces. And we do have incentives on that program in the city of Milwaukee available through March of this year. The Better Buildings Challenge helps large commercial buildings cut their energy use. And our Water-Centric City initiative really showcases Milwaukee's leadership on managing our water resources in a sustainable way. And you can read more about us at milwaukee.gov/eco. But today we're here explicitly to talk about climate change and why it matters to Milwaukee and what we are thinking we need to do about it as a result of the work coming out of the task force. So just A real quick overview of climate change. I assume many of you are familiar with it. It's been getting increasing coverage in the news about what, the really bad effects around the world and in our country. And I think for a long time, people in Milwaukee thought, well, this is a distant issue, but it really is starting to hit much closer to home. So the basic science is that, we are a relatively fragile planet, and our atmosphere, the Earth's atmosphere, really creates the conditions for life on Earth. And we, since the Industrial Revolution, have been using way too many fossil fuels to produce electricity in our cars, to heat our homes, and all of that is essential to our economy. But when we use too much, coupled with deforestation, it really messes up the atmospheric balance and warms up the planet to an unsustainable degree. So the combination of using too much fossil fuels plus the deforestation that has been happening is really, again, offsetting the eco balance of our world. And I would say the third big cause is the lack of sustained political action, especially at the federal level and internationally, where sometimes it seems like we're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back with the pendulum swing of the different federal administrations. But the one sustained thing, I think, is that cities are stepping up to have sustained and a real important focus on this at the local level. All of this is important. There is real threats from climate change. In Milwaukee, I think the biggest one is extreme storms and flooding. We just saw this last August, lots of wind damage from extreme winds that came through our city. We've seen wildfires in the West. There's food supply issues. We are going to see increasing issues with climate refugees. In other words, people from other parts of the world who are finding it difficult to live. It's simply too hot to live in certain parts of the world are going to be trying to move northward to find a better life. And we'll have to deal with those issues. There's national security concerns related to all of this movement of climate refugees and the like. And there's human health impacts as well, not just from the warming planet, but also air pollution coming from the same burning of those fossil fuels. So we cannot have sustained long-term economic growth unless we deal with this issue. And lastly, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the loss of biodiversity on our planet from this warming planet. It's warming faster than species can adapt, and we're seeing many species go extinct because of this. We have a detailed Milwaukee climate vulnerability report, so you can see more specific information, facts and figures about why this is an important issue in our city. And I think the other thing that is going to be an issue is just the heat itself on hot summer days can really affect people, lower income people too, who may not have air conditioning. And what the science tells us there is that the days themselves are not necessarily haven't been getting as much hotter so much as the nights are not cooling off as much. And so people can have heart issues and other issues when it doesn't cool off as much at night. And we have those real warm, muggy nights in the summertime. So again, I encourage you to read more about this, and we have plenty more information that we could get into. So that's why it's important that we act. This is one of the big crises that we face. I should say too, just to kind of put a fine point on it, we have 22 weather-related events just in 2020 alone that each cost more than $1 billion worth of damage. So again, this is really an issue that we are spending money to clean up the mess. And in my opinion, we should be spending more money on the front end to prepare for this. Again, so the climate issue is one issue. Racial equity is the other real crisis that we have to address. And when the task force was established, they were very clear at the outset that we need to address both challenges at the same time, climate change and racial equity. And this is just one data point that I think highlights the racial inequities in the city of Milwaukee. This is from our Office of Equity and Inclusion. They have a data dashboard, and this is related to household income from 2019. And so the couple of key points here, you see Black families are, the median household income is $30,000. The median household income for white families is $57,000. And equally problematic is the change over time, where the disparity is getting worse since the Great Recession. So we have to be intentional about addressing this racial problem in the city. But I also want to highlight that it's a metropolitan problem as well. A lot of times people think about Milwaukee as a segregated city, but it's also a segregated metropolitan area. And I think we all have an obligation in the metro area to try to address these things. This household income is just, again, one data point, but you see these similar racial disparities in basically every economic indicator, from jobs to home ownership and things of that nature. Also, energy burden has been a focus of our task force as well, meaning lower income households are spending more, not only as a percentage of their income, but in real dollars are spending more on their energy bills because a lot of times the homes aren't insulated and that sort of thing. So again, we have to be intentional about addressing both crises at the same time. So the task force was created in 2019, and it was created by both the county and the city through different resolutions, one through the city common council and one through the county board. I believe it was formed with very broad support from the city council, so not a lot of controversy in creating this. And the work done to date was we published a preliminary report in 2020 that highlighted many of the challenges, that said we needed to get a greenhouse gas inventory, which is a baseline of what our carbon emissions are. And then it said we need to accelerate the work we're already doing. So we established community working groups that have been really working hard throughout 2021. So it's the task force members, but it also includes dozens of other community members as well that are participating in monthly meetings to establish our 10 big ideas, which I will touch on in a little bit. So we're really excited about the ideas and energy that came out of many different stakeholders. So the basic timeline is I will present kind of our 10 big ideas to the city council and the county board in the next month or two. And hopefully, unless there's any major issues, we will then embark on writing up the formal report, which we hope to finish later this year. And we also hope to continue broad community engagement throughout the year so that people are aware of the plan, but also, we want to make sure that that there's buy-in for the plan and that it will be positive for the city and not have any unintended adverse effects on our residents. So again, we're really excited about continuing the public engagement on this. So the big goals here, there are two major goals. One is to reduce community greenhouse gas emissions 45% by 2030, and then try to be net zero by 2050. And this is consistent with the goals that Governor Evers has established for the state of Wisconsin, and he's had his own task force for the state level. So we want to, again, cut greenhouse gas emissions. And in doing so, this transition is going to create lots of green jobs. And we want to make sure we're being intentional about targeting these new green job opportunities for people of color and understanding that we're going to have to take steps to make sure they're connected to the education institutions that will be training for these jobs going forward. Our target wage that we're trying to create for these green jobs is at least $40,000 a year. Which would have a meaningful impact on those disparities we talked about for household income. This, by the way, is a picture of the solar project that we just recently completed this year in Milwaukee near the General Mitchell Airport through a partnership with We Energies, and I'll talk about with that a little bit further here. So we completed our greenhouse gas inventory. We have 7.76 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. CO2 is carbon dioxide. So this also includes other greenhouse gases, including methane and natural gas as well. And you can see that the big share of where our carbon emissions come from, it comes from the building sector, meaning industry, commercial buildings and homes. And about 22% is from transportation. Other categories include solid waste and our water and wastewater systems. So this gives you a little bit of flavor for where we need to target our efforts in reducing emissions. A couple caveats on this data. This does not include the airport and carbon emissions from airplanes, seafaring vessels that come into our port. And we also didn't get great data from our waste haulers like Waste Management. So the waste might be slightly underreported, but I think this presents a pretty good picture of where we're at. So we have to really cut down on our community greenhouse gas emissions. The good news is we're not starting from scratch. As Ann mentioned, we have had a sustainability office since 2006. We've been increasing our efforts pretty much every year. In 2013, we finalized a sustainability plan called Refresh Milwaukee. That was not just a climate plan, that was all things sustainability, including water and food systems. That was an intentional effort at that time. So our office, just so you know, doesn't only do climate stuff. We also do other things related to greening Milwaukee. But that was a foundational planning document from 2013. In 2019, the city passed a green infrastructure plan to really ramp up the amount of green space in the city to help us adapt to climate change, meaning we need to have more trees and green space to manage the increasing size of storms we're getting. We've also created the ME2 Home Energy Efficiency Program with the Obama stimulus from a decade ago. That program is still going on and still provides loans and incentives for weatherizing homes. I mentioned our Milwaukee Shine Solar program that had its biggest year ever to helping homeowners install solar on their roofs. And then you can see in the picture there, that's a 9-acre solar farm next to General Mitchell Airport. It's on a city-owned landfill. And We Energies built it, but the city worked with them to get this done. And then we get a lease revenue, which is funding climate efforts going forward. Milwaukee County has also done a similar arrangement on their park lands as well. So some good stuff going forward. We also have sustainability practices embedded in city and county operations. So for example, the police department is buying hybrid vehicles now. The parking operation is buying electric vehicles. We are working hard on energy efficiency in city operations. The county is doing efforts as well to cut energy use in county buildings. And then I think there's also been a big push on what's called multimodal transportation. So moving away from just single occupant automobiles to support things like the bubbler bike share system. The Department of Public Works has a complete streets program to try to rethink our streets to make them more pedestrian and bike friendly. And lately, Mayor Johnson has talked about efforts to reduce reckless driving, which includes further changes to our street design to make them more pedestrian and bike friendly. It also includes the HOP streetcar, and the county is working on bus rapid transit. So a lot going on with transportation, although I can say, I think it shouldn't be too controversial to say, I do think we're falling behind many other cities as it relates to our investments in transit because of the really tough financial constraints that both the city and the county are under. And then lastly, there are some encouraging new climate commitments from We Energies. I think they have been very slow to adapt to climate change relative to other cities and have been maybe even blocked some of our solar projects in 2018. But in the last 2 and 3 years, they've announced pretty ambitious climate goals. And so where there are opportunities to work with them, I look for those positive opportunities because I do think they could have a pretty big role to play in helping us expand our electric vehicle charging, for example, and helping with this transition to cleaner sources on the grid. We simply cannot get to these goals if we keep relying on coal-fired power plants for our electricity. So we really do need to find constructive ways to work with them going forward. So that's what's happened. But none of this is really getting us on track to hit those 45% targets without major new investments and actions at the city and the county level. So the working groups have been working hard on these 10 big ideas and hope to unpack some of these for you this evening. So the first one pertains to residential energy efficiency for existing buildings. So we have a pretty old housing stock in the city. Much of it was built in the 20s. Then there was a big influx of new housing in the 1950s, and most of it was not built with energy efficiency in mind. So we need to do more to help weatherize those homes and make them more energy efficient. One of the, I think, opportunities that came out of the working groups, and I want to particularly note Alderman Kovac's leadership on this, is the idea of doing what we call green and healthy homes. So not looking at just energy efficiency, but looking at how we can coordinate energy efficiency with lead abatement. because that is also another big environmental issue in this city. And the American Rescue Plan funds that the city received under Alderman Kovac's leadership, the council allocated a total of $28 million for mostly lead abatement, but also energy efficiency to be piggybacked on top of that. And the idea is that once we're in a home and workers are in there trying to remove lead paint, that we use that same opportunity to put in insulation and things of that nature. So we're pretty excited about that new program that we will roll out. That is in addition to our ME2 program, but it's going to be targeted to zip codes that are the most impoverished in our city and have the highest energy burden. A big idea number 2 is new net zero energy homes. So we have a strategy for existing homes, but we're also recognizing that we need to build new homes in the city of Milwaukee on the many vacant lots that we have. And the question is, how do you get them to be net zero energy? How do you get them to be affordable, durable, and cost effective? And what we are proposing here is that we support a new factory in the city of Milwaukee that will build housing components, either modular housing or wall panels that can be built in a factory and then assembled on site. And the idea is that we can really drive a renaissance in manufacturing, or at least support the manufacturing economy, as well as hit our housing goals and our sustainability goals. So I'm pretty excited about that one. I think it's really unique, and I think it's going to be able to create year-round jobs in neighborhoods that really need it. Item number 3 is this commercial building energy benchmarking. So our office between 2015 and 2017 had a voluntary program for commercial buildings where we asked them to benchmark their energy use, report their energy use, and then we provided financing and other incentives to help them make energy efficiency improvements. What other cities are doing that we are taking a real hard look at is requiring commercial buildings to annually report on their energy use. And the idea is that if they have to be transparent in their energy use, they will have an incentive to take energy efficient actions. Some cities around the country are then going a step further and phasing in higher energy performance standards for buildings to try to drive down energy use further. And so that is something we are taking a hard look at. Of course, we'll want to get the input from the commercial real estate community on how we roll that out. But I think it is necessary to take that stronger action to try to drive down carbon emissions in our big buildings. Number 4 here is electric vehicles. So one of the things we want to do is move away from fossil fuels, do more renewables when it comes to the electric grid, and then help convert vehicles from petroleum and gasoline to electric. And so what that is required there is to really expand the amount of charging infrastructure that is out there. So there's more public stations, as well as potentially incentives for homeowners to install charging in their homes as well. And you're seeing a lot of the car manufacturers move to electric vehicles. It's a big part of the federal strategy to cut carbon emissions in the transportation sector. So the fuels within transportation, there's a switch to electric cars, but we also just need to cut the amount of travel we're doing by car altogether. We're calling that reducing vehicle miles. And that is through a combination of a lot of things. It's reinvesting in transit, especially bus rapid transit and the hop streetcar, as well as possibilities of heavier rail. It means, again, expanding bike lanes and trying to create walkable communities. And there's a lot of land use issues around that. I mean, the way you design cities, the more compact you make them, meaning, if you can get more people in a square mile, that supports the walkability of people getting to restaurants and that sort of thing. And so you don't have to have a car. And I think that's an area where we need better partnerships with the state. I think a lot of the transportation budget at the state level has supported this kind of sprawling out effect of the metropolitan area. And we want to see more concentrated expenditures of transportation in cities. The big one here, though, is net zero electric grid. So really greening the grid and transitioning the utility away from coal-fired power plants and natural gas-fired power plants to more renewable energy. And again, I think Wisconsin has been real behind on this. We got to really step up the efforts to to retire these coal-fired power plants and get more renewable power online. The good news is 2021 was a record year in Wisconsin, and I think the utilities are starting to move in this direction. But we got to go a long, long way. I mean, we're still in single digits, I think, in renewable energy in our service area, and we got to get, eventually to 100%. So we got a long way to go. Number 6 here is nature in the city. And the idea there is that we need more trees, continue to ramp up our efforts with the green infrastructure plan. One of the opportunities we see is helping schoolyards convert their asphalt parking lots into green space. We have a great partnership already with Milwaukee Public Schools where we're doing 5 schoolyards a year. I would like to see that ramped up to 10. But then I think commercial parking lots are a big opportunity as well to remove pavement and add trees and green space. We also need to preserve our existing natural spaces in the city and make sure that we're planting more trees and parks and in lower income neighborhoods, which tend to have less tree cover. We also want to reduce food waste. So within the solid waste portion of where our carbon emissions, food waste plays a role there. And so there's a hierarchy of how you go about reducing food waste. You start with making sure that excess food goes to feed hungry people. And then down on the line, eventually you want to support composting as well. But food waste is an area that the public really said we should focus on within solid waste. In my opinion, another area that we can't forget about is plastic waste. So many restaurants and businesses are moving towards plastic packaging, especially with Amazon and things like that. Everything's wrapped in plastic these days. And so we got to find ways to, I think, reduce that plastic waste as well. I'm going to skip to resilience ambassadors and I'll come back to green jobs because that's a really, really important one that undergirds the whole thing. But resilience ambassadors, the idea there is that we will have, essentially work with the nonprofit community to educate people about climate change on the ground, help them understand what they need to do to protect their homes from severe flooding, educate people on government programs and other programs to weatherize their homes and make them healthier, and essentially build more public interest in these climate strategies that we're talking about. And then the last one that is just so important from an economic equity standpoint is what we're calling our Green Jobs Accelerator. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about what are these green jobs? How do we get people interested in them? How do we train people for them? And one of the big green jobs of the future is electricians. A lot of what you're seeing here relates to the electrification of cars, LED streetlights, LED conversions in our homes. So a lot of solar panels. So a lot of opportunity, I think, for electricians. We have data showing that particular job sector it's pretty white, it's pretty male. So there's room to diversify it, but it does pay really well. And so that's a great opportunity to expand that particular job category. There's also green jobs and weatherization workers, lead abatement workers, building control technicians. So the people that help manage all the heating and cooling systems in buildings. And then there's going to be manufacturing jobs as well, including people making net zero energy homes in a factory and what we hope will be in Century City. So lots of green job opportunities coming out of this. Now, one thing we've kind of targeted here is we need to build interest in these jobs. And we talk a lot about getting people interested at younger ages in these industries. So working with the schools at a younger age before people have even graduated from high school, giving them a good sense of what are the jobs, where do they need to go to get trained for the jobs, and then getting them transition smoothly out of high school into those career pathways, whether it be at MATC, the unions have their own training operations, or the four-year universities as well. So we are actually in the process of writing a fairly large grant to the federal government requesting funding for this Green Jobs Accelerator. So that we also need to have employer commitments to hire people of color coming out of these training programs. And so that's something we're exploring as well. So that concludes the 10 big ideas. you'll see that we really need all of these things to hit our 45% or 2030 goal, 45% reduction by 2030. Each one contributes to this. You'll see that greening the grid really is kind of the most foundational. I mean, if we can't get more renewable energy on the grid, a lot of these other strategies don't make as much sense. You know, for example, we need to have more renewables, more of our electricity coming from renewable energy, so that when we convert to electric vehicles, we're finding the cleanest source of energy possible. The other things that we need support from are, we need to encourage the state of Wisconsin to cut their energy, or I'm sorry, encourage the state of Wisconsin to set a more stringent building code for commercial buildings, so that all new buildings built in the state are done to high energy standards. So this is just again, showing what it would take to get to these big carbon goals. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take investment in new sources of funding. We are encouraged by some of the funding that came out of Congress and the federal government already. The American Rescue Plan was one source of funds that has really been helpful to jumpstart these efforts. Before the new year, the federal government passed an infrastructure bill that can help jumpstart some of this, especially electric vehicle charging. So we're optimistic about that. But unfortunately, there's still more bills that are kind of stuck in the Senate at federal level that would really be essential to really move this stuff forward. However, I think it's really been important to get a plan in place so that when the federal money, if and when it becomes available, we're ready to go. And so I really appreciate again, Alderman Kovac and Representative Moran-Makunde for really encouraging us to get this plan in place so that we are ready when funding becomes available. So that's the basics of the presentation, and I'd be happy to get into all of those 10 big ideas in more detail if there's particular questions about how they might work. That's been the work of the working groups, is to really operationalize how these concepts come together. But I just want to, again, thank you all for taking the time to be here, to demonstrate your interest in this. I put our website in the chat so you can look at the plan in more detail. You can see all of the planning documents. There's online surveys about these different strategies. And we encourage you to get engaged, stay engaged, and work with us to build the political support to implement these policies. Because again, it's not going to be easy, but I think if we work together, we can make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eric. That was really informative. And you mentioned that you need public support to make all of this happen and to get approval, I think, through the city council and at the county level. And, let us know what action items we can help with in that regard. So now we're going to go to Louise Petering, our former State League president, is going to be introducing our panelists today. We're very fortunate to have these wonderful panelists with us here, as well as Eric. And after that, there will be Q&As. And I want to remind people again, please put your questions into the chat. And so Louise, you want to take it away?
Thanks very much, Ann. Again, I'll repeat, please put your questions in the chat. I see 10 questions there already, or comments. And know that your questions will be addressed by Mr. Shambarger and the panel members, and they may piggyback on one another's comments. I would like to note that Mr. Ted Craig has joined us. And now before we go to your questions, I will introduce very briefly each panel member, and then they will all make a 1-minute comment about what compelled their participation in the task force. We'll begin with Mr. Nick Kovac, co-chair of the City-County Climate Change and Economic Equity Task Force, also Milwaukee City Alderman since 2008. Mr. Kovac.
Thank you, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this on, and everyone who's here expressing their interest in these two important issues, these two overlapping crises that are affecting our city and our country and our world, climate change and racial inequity. This was something really, well, Supreme Maura Mukunde, former county supervisor, current state representative, was really one of the driving forces behind this at the county level. And former presidents Ashanti Hamilton and former President Cavalier Johnson, current acting Mayor Cavalier Johnson were the driving force at the city. And I was appointed first by Ashanti and then again by Cavalier to represent the city on this important task force. For me, both of these issues are things that I'm very passionate about in terms of my legislative work and my civic work, and have been since before I was elected. The racial inequality is something that is all too obvious in Milwaukee, and climate change is something that's becoming more and more obvious everywhere. And it's, at first glance, you might say, well, what do these two things have to do with each other? And what I've said before is that there's an opportunity here, because the only way to solve climate change, I mean, there's been language like Green New Deal, call it what you want. You're going to need massive government intervention, fiscally and regulatorily, to stop climate, or to reduce climate change and begin to and then mitigate the inevitable effects of the climate change that's already occurred. So you're going to have massive investment and massive changes in the way the economy works and some of the supply chains works, and even just some of the ways we as citizens get around.
Okay.
And with those kinds, oh, am I going too long? Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine. Thank you. It's quite clear that you are passionate about this.
Right.
So I'll move on to Mr. Ted Craig, Wisconsin Climate Table appointee to the task force. Mr. Craig.
Yeah, I'll try to be super brief from what I just saw. So yeah, my day job is I'm a union rep for teachers. I work for an affiliate of WEAC, and I'm on the task force group being active in citizen action of Wisconsin. It's something I've cared about since the 1980s, when the science became absolutely settled that we're changing the climate and it's going to be catastrophic. And my wife told me when my kids were younger, you're scaring them, cut it out. And it is a challenge, but I really admire Greta Thunberg, who said, look, we don't need you to tell us pleasant things. We want you to be alarmed, because it's very alarming what's going to happen with climate. And this task force was where the rubber meets the road. It's amazing the stuff that can be done to roll back emissions and at the same time to create economic opportunity and reduce racial inequality. There's been great leadership from Supreme and Alderman Kobach and from Erick Shambarger. And it's just very exciting. We can do great things that'll make not only address climate, but make the city a much more livable, pleasant place to live, and more equal and more fair.
Thank you. And now on to Ms. Pamela Rittger, Program Director and Staff Attorney for Clean Wisconsin, Milwaukee. Ms. Rittger.
Thank you. And thanks so much for inviting me to be part of the panel. So, I was really excited to be appointed to this task force. Like Ted, I started out in immigration, and I kind of changed my career path about 10 years ago, just really seeing the climate crisis in front of us and wanted to do everything I could to be part of that solution. And I just think this is a challenge that we have to confront. It's just the longer we wait, the more difficult it's going to be, and the worse the impacts are going to be. And we already know, and we see that the impacts are worse among the people who are already underserved, and probably people who in our country, in our city, and around the globe, who have contributed the least to this problem. So it's just a really great injustice. But at the same time, as Ted, mentioned, this is really a great opportunity to change our energy and our transportation systems, create a lot of green jobs, and just improve the quality of life in our city. When we're driving fewer cars, using more transit, changing to electric vehicles, that means less local air pollution in our communities. As we're making more nature in the city, that is going to, cool our environment and just make it a more pleasant and healthier place to live. So, that's what, part of this is all about. And thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you for being here. And finally, panel member Representative Maura Omokunde. As you've heard, he was co-founder of the City-County Task Force, and played a central role in its initiation and crafting the plan. Representative.
Well, thank you very much for having me here today. I want to thank the League of Women Voters and everyone else who's participating here today. What really brought me to the table is the fact that we're at the precipice of climate catastrophe. And I saw the opportunity for us to do something about that. Not only that, but it was also an opportunity to do something about economic inequity in our city. When we look at African-American unemployment rates in the city of Milwaukee, and we knew that we had to do something. And this was an opportunity to take two things and put them together. And normally people don't think about them as relating to one another, but it's an opportunity to take two things, put them together and have them help one another out, creating this new green infrastructure that we want to create. And also being able to bring in folks who are most likely left out of the equation, to bring them in to do those kinds of jobs and be able to recreate these lost industries that we lost in the city. During deindustrialization. So it was an opportunity for both aspects to feed off of each other. So it was a great opportunity. And like Eric and Ted and Nick Kovac stated, government had been lost, or there wasn't a great deal of investment from government. And as someone who was from government, I saw an opportunity to put that piece in it as well.
Thank you very much for your comments, one and all. And we'll now proceed to the questions. I will begin with the first question. Relates to the comments that were made earlier about when was the Milwaukee Climate Vulnerability Task Force produced? About when was that produced? How old is that data, or are that data? I think that's for Mr. Shambarger to begin with.
So we did the preliminary report overall on the climate plan was March of 2020, right before the pandemic. We wrapped up our work, and then we actually contracted with Pam in Clean Wisconsin to do the vulnerability report. So they did a great job on that document, and I think we finished that up, I don't know, maybe around August of 2021, something like that. But I mean, the data coming out of these big catastrophic weather events is just, it's getting worse all the time. I mean, every year is bringing more wildfires and extreme storms. And so it's here. It's not a distant thing anymore.
Okay. Any comments by any of the panelists here? Okay, then. Are there statistics on local job displacement created by producing a net zero grid, emissions grid?
I'm not sure about this.
Are there more jobs created than displaced?
I mean, I think we're going to see, there's going to be a lot of initial jobs in the building solar panels. So a lot of effort is going to need to be happen on the front end to all the construction that's going to go into that. There's less people to run a solar farm than a coal plant because it's just there. But it's going to take a ton of work to get this transition to install solar and at a utility scale, but also on our roofs. So I do see a net positive, particularly for the city of Milwaukee, where it's not just it's the how power is produced, but it's also the weatherization jobs that go into this, and all energy efficiency jobs throughout the whole economy. So Ted's got his hand up.
Ted.
Yeah, I just say, there's a lot of different areas you can look at, but there's much research suggesting that it's a net job creator. And just like from the Wisconsin perspective, there was a great report done by COWS, Center on Wisconsin Strategy, where they showed we're spending just billions of dollars to import coal and natural gas to this state that we could be spending just in the state, right? I mean, we're spending tons of money basically out of the state. And it would create, really, I forget the number, but many thousands of jobs to take that money and invest it in things like solar and wind and efficiency. So everything I've seen, and the chair of the transportation working group indicates that transitioning, to a more efficient economy is a net job creator. Obviously, there's transitions that need to be considered for people, say, working at a coal-fired power plant who are going to need to find new work, and we need to really invest in that too. But on the whole, it makes us more prosperous as far as job opportunities.
Yeah, And I would just add that I would hope that we should think about Wisconsin as an energy efficiency state. I mean, I can kind of get where a place like Louisiana or Texas that does oil refining and things like that might be a little more cautious. But I mean, for a state like Wisconsin, where we have such a great history of companies investing in energy efficiency technology, I think it's a natural for us.
With respect to jobs, are there plans to train people, and is there financing available to support training of people for these jobs? Is that part of your grant application?
So if I can chime in, I know that there's a lot of work being done at the federal level. Senator Tammy Baldwin has authored a letter talking about transitional jobs and making sure that we can transition from dirtier, if you will, jobs to cleaner and greener jobs that we can have folks doing in the long term. Because when you look at technology and how it's coming about, we're going to have to change a whole lot of things differently. And as we get more and more technologically savvy, we're going to have to start talking about green jobs and a green economy. And with that, we're going to have to retrain folks anyway. So why not retrain them in a way that is more sustainable for our economy and for our environment as well? And there's already plans in the works from folks, like I said, Senator Tammy Baldwin, and it's a part of our work in what we're doing right now to transition folks into these newer jobs.
And I will say the Common Council allocated $3 million for green job development as part of the American Rescue Plan, with particular focus on lead abatement and energy efficiency, weatherization jobs.
Okay. Anyone else want to contribute to that information?
If I could just add one more thing about
Sure.
jobs, and I think it is important to say that the jobs being lost in fossil fuel sector, a lot of those are actually unionized good jobs, like say the people working for We Energies at the Oak Creek power plants. And it's not automatic that the jobs that are created, say installing solar energy or weatherizing houses or what have you, are necessarily going to be great family supporting jobs. They should be, but we need to be very purposeful about that, actually having standards for the jobs so that we replace the jobs that are lost with actually quality jobs that support the families and communities.
Okay, thank you. Oh, let's see. I gotta go to another question. Please speak about the financial constraints the city and county are experiencing and how we can help address those.
I would say that the biggest reason, with apologies to Representative Maura Mukunde, the biggest reason we are under such constraints is the state government. Could the federal government at various times have been more helpful? Yes, but the federal government tends to occasionally give us the wrong word, make major investments that affect cities and can help us. They don't really control us and limit us. The state government does that. They collect our sales and our income taxes, and then they don't give it back. And then when we suggest, well, if you're going to keep all that money, can we generate some new money? They say no. And so the best way to advocate for this would be at the state level, and the best way to make it so that your state government listens to you, obviously Supreme Maura Mukunde will, but to make sure that he's in the majority, or somebody that listens to you is in the majority, whatever the future, partisan constructions end up being in the future, is to really advocate for fair maps and to push the state Supreme Court and to help the coalition to get fair maps, because with the permanent minority rule guaranteed by the current gerrymander, it is very hard to imagine state government being a real partner. Now, they're making some noise that they might take a look at some of this stuff, but from what I've heard in their various drafts, any help they give us would be one step forward, two step backs with some of the additional constraints they'd put on us. And what I mean by that in particular is, minimum staffing for public safety or other kinds of things where they would force us to spend a ton, all the money they might give us, they'd force us to spend it in ways they want us to spend it. And incidentally, with this current state government in the majority, they don't want us to spend it on racial equity and climate change. I mean, they're explicit about that. So in a nutshell, it's the state government, and we need to make real changes there and do advocacy at that level.
Okay, I will say that the League of Women Voters is participating in the Fair Maps thing. Someone else had a comment here, I believe.
Yes, I just wanted to add that Alderman Kovac is absolutely right. And I want to encourage residents to organize and rise up and contact folks at the state level and let them know what's important to you, because one of the folks' most favorite phrases there is, nobody's asking me about this. Nobody's requesting this of me. This is just something that you want, and the people in my area don't want this. If this is something that's important to you, and climate justice and economic equity is important to you in the place that you live in the state of Wisconsin, let the people who represent you know, whether they have a D or an R behind their name. At least they're going to hear from people. And so when people like me go to them and say, hey, climate justice is a real thing, and climate change is a challenge, they can't say that nobody warned them or nobody talked to them about it, because you're actually rising up, organizing, and contacting them and letting them know what's important to you.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on to another question. How will solar energy be stored? How is it distributed? What company is in charge of solar energy and its distribution? I see the smiles.
Well, I can give you a little electric utility primer 101. So about 100 years ago, there was some decision that said we're going to divvy up the state to different electric utility providers. And so regulatory compact, as it's called, is that we are under We Energy service territory, but they are to be regulated in the public interest by an appointed body in Madison called the Public Service Commission. And so theoretically, even though it's a privately owned public utility, the Public Service Commission is to set rules to allow them to operate. I was just in Madison today because there was the Public Service Commission is reevaluating the incentives that they have for utilities. Right now, utilities, they basically decide where their power is coming from. There is some opportunity for homeowners to install solar, but the rules governing that are not as open as they are in other states. So for example, we tried at the city to put a megawatt of solar on city buildings, and the utilities said, well, we're not going to interconnect all of those because they didn't like the way we financed it. And so that's being challenged in court and at the Public Service Commission. So the basic framework is the utilities have a lot of power. They don't have 100% power as to where power comes, or where solar energy comes from, but they have a lot more control over it, and it's made it a little bit more difficult than in other states. And we are working to change that from a regulatory standpoint. So there are a couple of ways it works. It's really hard to store electrons. I mean, they flow through the grid, and the utilities are in charge of, controlling how much power is on the grid and ramping up their coal plants when the sun is not shining. And when the sun shines, they can dial back their power to some extent. And batteries are becoming more, over time, they're becoming more cost competitive. But until the price comes down, and I think it'll come down in the next 5 to 10 years, you'll see a lot more battery storage. That's really going to be critical to getting to 100% renewable energy. But as it stands right now, most people don't do battery storage. They just connect their solar through their home and into the grid.
Okay.
But this is an area I want to just put a plug in for cities are kind of partnering up. We created what we call the Wisconsin Local Government Climate Coalition, so that we have a voice at the Public Service Commission. I mean, a lot of this stuff is very hard to understand for the average person. Sure. I was glad I went to Madison today, because if I hadn't, there might have just been utilities there, right? Talking about these things. And it's important to have different community groups showing up at those kinds of dry administrative hearings, because they have a huge impact on the rules of the game for how solar happens. And so again, it's really important for cities to come together and different interest groups to come together and be involved in those dockets to open up the markets for solar energy.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Pam Rittger. Does Clean Wisconsin work with the Citizens Utility Board at all, since they do attend Public Service Commission meetings and do comment and act on behalf of small energy users, small businesses, and so forth?
Yeah, we do. We intervene in several cases at the Public Service Commission on a regular basis in support of solar and wind energy projects. And when the utilities come to the Public Service Commission every few years to set their rates or take different actions, we always intervene on behalf of the environment and on behalf of our members. Yeah, so we participate frequently, and we often we work closely with the Citizens Utility Board as well,
Okay.
in terms of having fair rates for ratepayers throughout the state. But yeah, there are a number of frequent interveners in those cases, and yeah, Clean Wisconsin Cub are part of those, Renew Wisconsin and other nonprofits, and yeah, and it is important that we're there because it's a it's a difficult process to follow, and so yeah, so it's important that we do have interveners on behalf of different parties there.
Thank you. Any other comments from the panel or Mr. Shambarger? Okay, I have another question here. How do lead issues in Milwaukee intersect with this new plan?
I'd be happy to jump in.
Go ahead.
with that. So I was chair of the Green Buildings Group, and in looking at a lot of the maps of our city and the impacts that the large impacts like high energy burdens and high levels of lead poisoning, we noticed that there was a lot of overlap in where we were seeing really high energy burdens, which basically means that a household is paying a disproportionately high amount of their monthly and yearly income on energy costs. About 6% of your monthly income is considered, beyond 6%, higher than that, is considered a high energy burden. And we have some areas of our city where people are paying up to 19% of their income on energy, and that doesn't make sense. And in Milwaukee and in other communities as well, that does we are seeing higher energy burdens in Black and Latino households as well. And then again, we saw a lot of overlap with where the areas of the city where we have high levels of lead poisoning. And I think as Erick or Alderman Kovac mentioned already, there's an opportunity to make homes healthier and more energy efficient at the same time. Again, because these are a lot of the same areas, these are a lot of the same houses are dealing with both of these issues. So, we're working with a national nonprofit organization that has helped to, it's the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative. And this is something that they have worked on for decades now, partnering with cities and with states as well to help address these issues of lead abatement, energy efficiency, as well as looking at asthma triggers, all of these different elements that have to go along with having healthy homes for our residents. And so we just saw a lot of opportunity for there to be that overlap. And again, with this influx of ARPA funds, that's really going to help to move things forward and really help to ramp up these efforts. So we just have, better quality housing for a lot of our residents in Milwaukee, healthy in terms of, the environment, not having these toxic lead in their environment, but also having more comfortable homes that are warmer in the winter, cooler in the summer, and that where people are spending a lot less of their money on energy. That money that's not spent on energy can be spent on rent, can be spent on food, medicine, all of these different things. So
thank you.
Yeah, I would add on that the lead paint crisis and the public health crisis of that then leading to elevated blood in hundreds of children in Milwaukee every year is not directly climate related. It definitely has racial disparities, huge racial disparities in if you look at the geographic map of the neighborhoods where it's happening. But like with so much that we're doing, like, does climate change and racial inequality, are these even the same issues? I mean, they overlap, they intersect, but they're pretty distinct issues, right? But the solution to one can help solve the other. And if we're going to try solving the one, we got to make sure we solve the other, because if we make the necessary investments to move the needle on climate change, we'll be making such a massive investment that it will be a huge opportunity to change employment patterns and change training. So along that theme, we had this lead paint crisis that the city did not handle all the last few years. That's well known. Some of the bureaucratic there's issues of the program was well designed, but it was not being well implemented. Okay. We had this opportunity with the federal money. We decided to make this a priority, a public health priority. There's obviously an impact on racial equity by doing that, by who you're helping, but also who you're employing to do it. You want to look at, but then as Eric mentioned, as long as we're in the house, the additional cost of, if we're going to remediate the lead paint, the additional cost of making the windows energy efficient and insulating between the walls where the paint's on, as long as you're in there, it's much cheaper maybe cheaper is the wrong word. You can stack your investments, and whereas if you tried to solve the problem one, then the other, and brought in whole new crews, it'd be much more expensive. So it's an opportunity to layer your investments to try to affect public health, racial disparities, and climate change all at once. And Pam and her group have been really instrumental in their work with the Green and Healthy Homes nationally and implementing that locally, because there's other cities that have done that very well, that have done both the lead paint remediation and the energy efficiency at the same time. They're related, and they're right next to each other.
It does sound like efficient use of personnel and dollars. So I'm going to go on to another question, unless one of you want to add on to that. Is there a business opportunity for a company to create solar battery productions here in Milwaukee or Wisconsin?
Yes, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is I think there's going to be a huge transition, and I think there's a bipartisan interest in getting more manufacturing back in the United States. I would think, and
right.
there is a good amount of good cluster of companies that do this sort of thing in Wisconsin. There was a Midwest Energy Research Consortium, and they have Wisconsin has a lot of expertise in generators. Generac is based here.
Right.
There's a lot of different companies that are in the energy power and control space. And I remember I was in one of their member meetings, and they were talking about market opportunities, and they were always talking about California. And I was like, there's big market opportunities. I was like, well, they have policies that support this stuff. I mean, our Wisconsin companies, we should have better state policy to support those companies building here, investing here, and absolutely, we should have a state strategy to support industries, whether it's building solar, building batteries, building energy efficiency technologies.
Okay.
Yes, if I can chime in on that as well.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
And to the point that Eric was making about what they do in California, one of the things that I've been not shocked by, but I'm not even surprised by, is they have entire storage units in California where you can buy solar panels, and then part of that purchase is buying this like storage unit for the days where it's more cloudy, you can't get enough, or it might be dark longer, and so you can use that stored electricity in your home. And also, there are many people who see the train coming down the track, whether it be electric vehicles or batteries, et cetera. We used to make batteries in the city of Milwaukee. We had the Adelphis here. And so we can get back into that business, so to speak. I think it's really important, though, that we don't allow individuals who want to privatize everything to let them come in and say, we're not going to work with unions. We're not going to work with people to try to create these sustainable jobs. We have to make sure that the public sector and government has a portion to play and a part to play in what we're doing, so that we can ensure people are making a living wage. We can ensure that there's going to be environmental protections for folks, and that we're going to plan and do all of these things according to what our morals and what our values are.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll go on to another question. This is great, says someone. I look forward to working with the task force and others. I have to jump right now, which means they're leaving the program, but we will certainly inform all of those who attended today of the availability of this video and this conversation. I'm going to check the chat once more. I don't see any more questions there. And
Louise,
yes,
could I jump in here?
go ahead, Ann.
I think there was a question about transportation, and someone was lamenting how our state is behind the USA in transportation, and Milwaukee seems to also be lagging in terms of cities across the country. What are some plans that you all have for transportation that is equitable and also sustainable?
If I can jump in on this first, I think, was that Ann who had the question about transportation?
No, it wasn't. I maybe it was Ann Gainey. I'm not sure who had
Okay.
the question.
I
Not
sit on
sure.
I sit on the Assembly's Transportation Committee, so I can have a conversation with someone all day about that. If they just want to give me a call, we can sit down and talk about it. Like I said, with electric vehicles, there are people who see the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. They want to jump in line and get on that really quickly, because they see we gotta reduce the amount of internal combustible engines in our system and replace them with electric vehicles. We need to do that for private vehicles, and also we need to have a sustainable public transit system that helps us to be off the road more. Whether that be in our buses, I know that's something we're doing at Milwaukee County with our buses. We're trying to get more electric buses. We have to figure out how we can charge them and keep them charged, because sometimes the ones that we're looking at don't do as well in extreme temperatures, like extreme cold or extreme heat, and we can experience both of those. But what we are doing some investing in those. We need to do more investing in that. We need to get some of the federal money and invest in our local areas as well. Just like we're always interested in taking large tanks and heavily armed machines for our communities when it comes to policing, we should be able to take those kinds of vehicles and those kinds of dollars to invest in green infrastructure, especially when it comes to transportation, and also giving people the option to use public transit as well. There was this train that they were trying to build between Milwaukee and Madison. That would have been great. I wish somebody would have thought about that sooner. And it connected us from Wisconsin all the way to Louisiana. And having options where we have less people on the road and people emitting less greenhouse gas emissions is always the goal. And so if you want to talk about transportation, give me a call, 608-266-5580, and we can talk about it.
Thank you. I hear you're very passionate. Okay, I have a question.
Can we give Ted a shot at that one? He was the chair.
Oh, go ahead.
Good mind. I don't think I can top what Supreme just said as far as detail and enthusiasm. But as Erick outlined with the 10 big ideas, we are drawing up fairly, I would call a pretty comprehensive plan to increase public transit, and including rapid transit that would be time competitive with driving in cars. And to make the streets more walkable and bikeable and safer, because that's a big issue in Milwaukee too. Is just we've got way too many traffic deaths, and frankly, reorienting the city towards foot traffic and towards bikes and towards public transit is one way to make the streets a heck of a lot safer. So you'll see when the plan comes out, there are some really comprehensive plans to do something serious about transit. A couple things just to point out is that transit is the hardest area to move the needle. There are a lot of cities around the country that are trying to move the needle on greenhouse gas emissions, and that's been the slowest to actually succeed and get progress on. People are really used to getting in those cars and driving them around. They're very convenient. So we're gonna have to work really hard, and I think find local funding sources to move the needle so that we really have the kind of public transit and the kind of walkable neighborhoods that we ought to have.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Can I talk about transit too briefly?
Go ahead.
Yeah, again, I can't top either of those. And Ted has been doing a lot of hard work with his work group. There's all these different work groups, subgroups of the task force that do this tremendous work. But it's on the one hand, there's so much hope when you write these things up, because you go, oh, we could do this, we could do that. But then the reality of actually trying to implement it, which I've been doing for more than a decade, is so frustrating. Some of that's because even the utility company got involved and helped increase the cost of the streetcar by over 10%, 10 years ago. But I'm also on the board, the Transportation Board of Sewer PAC, which is this very unfortunately named 7-county regional group. They were so desperate to not call themselves the Milwaukee 7 counties that they were willing to come up with an acronym called Sewer PAC to describe a regional planning commission, the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. But it's so frustrating. A lot of the staff on that staffs that commission is very responsible and very smart, and some of them have volunteered with our work groups. But for 50 years, we've been saying, "Oh, let's build these roads and let's build this transit."
Mhm.
And then the road plans happen and the transit plans don't. And then the funding has been cut and cut and cut. So the existing bus system is in a death. I don't want to say death spiral. That's maybe too dramatic, but it's in a feedback loop going in the wrong direction. Could become a death spiral if we give it a few years of doing nothing. And then on the other hand, you have the trying to make investments in rail, and it's so difficult politically and structurally to get it done. But it's really, the difficulty is political. It's not money. Yes, it's a lot of money, but it's not that much money compared to what we spend on roads. So there's sort of this myth of, the freedom of the American individual and the car, but a car is not very free unless the government has spent trillions of dollars on roads for generations before you got in that car, right? So there is already massive government investment in transportation. So the question is, do we want to invest in car only or multimodal? And I'm glad Ted mentioned safety, because look at Capitol Drive. Look at look, they're hurt. Imagine if we had dedicated bus lanes or rail tracks, or thought about pedestrians and bikes seriously on Capitol Drive. It would be a totally different experience, and it would be a much more all the neighborhoods on either side of Capitol Drive would be so much more livable if we changed. And that's just one obvious example that I think everybody knows about, but there's lots of roads in Milwaukee I could say that about. So it's a conceptual framework that we need to change in the way we think about our investments as taxpayers. And then if we can all make that leap of faith and convince some of the other key power brokers to do it, the money's there, we're just spending it wrong.
Okay, thank you. I have a question about lake wind farms in Lake Michigan. Is there any discussion about that, and what is its status?
We've not spent a lot of time thinking about that. I mean, my sense is that the cost of solar has finally come down to the point where it's cheaper than coal for when the sun is shining, at least. And so we've seen the utilities move towards this interest in solar that they didn't have before. And so that's what we've really been focusing on primarily. I have brought up when I've been in discussions with them about, putting wind turbines in the lake. And I think there's just a lot of concerns about the cost effectiveness of it relative to the cheaper options of solar, because it's not, getting the foundations and the power and running and all that stuff it's a pretty big endeavor. And I don't want to say it's out of the picture entirely, but we're kind of looking at the lower hanging fruit, so to speak.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I just did a little research, and I think the one offshore wind energy project that I know about, they've been trying to get off the ground in Lake Erie for about 10 years, and it's still kind of hung up. So, maybe at some point in the future, but I agree, that's definitely not, the lowest hanging fruit is energy efficiency. And then we have to switch out the grid. There's a lot of improvements that we can do that are, that don't take that much effort.
Okay, I have another question here. Is the Common Council and the City Board firmly and resolutely committed to the climate and equity plan over the long haul? It strikes me that we need to have that commitment from both bodies. Would you please comment on that?
Well, as Supreme mentioned, he used to be on the county board and is still in great touch with everyone there. And speaking for myself and my colleagues, I think there is very broad agreement and pretty deep consensus among the current members. But when the question was for the long term, and there's elections every 2 years at the county and every 4 years at the city. So I mean, one of the reasons you want to put the plans is you want to try to attempt to make this commitment. But just speaking realistically, there are going to be so many other decisions that come later that are contingent. And so planning is very important. We wouldn't be doing all the work we're doing to do it. But I agree that the future commitment of future council members and county board will be crucial. And I think the current council's there. But it's very hard to predict, future terms.
I understand. Ted Craig.
Yeah, I would just weigh in on this, and no offense to the great leaders who are present, but politicians, you need them to do things, okay? But politicians generally do things when they know there's a popular groundswell, when they know there's a broad, strong, powerful community support to do things. So it's not enough to rely on your elected bodies.
Right.
You've got to be organized and you got to push for things. You got to elect the people who do care. And that's fundamental. So there's no long-term commitment from any elected body. The long-term commitment has to come from the community being organized and caring and pushing for things.
Thank you. Thank you for that urging message to keep us moving. Question here, and after this will be our last question. Apparently you mentioned, Erick, you will be presenting the plan to the Common Council in the coming weeks or months. Approximately when, and please comment.
Well, I think we have a meeting with our full task force tomorrow, and that's going to be a topic. I mean, I think if we have consensus on everything that the working groups put together, it could be as early as February.
Okay.
But we will let you know when that, if and when that communication file is scheduled, and would encourage you to participate or urge
Sure.
support for it. As Alderman Kovac said, I am encouraged by, I think local politicians are talking more about climate, have gotten more comfortable talking about climate change. I mean, when I first started, I don't think a lot of people wouldn't even talk about it that much. And I think because of the groundswell of support, young people are very, very worried about this. I mean, I get emails constantly from young people coming out of college that are really concerned, want to get involved in jobs and green jobs. And so that's an important first step, that we have most of our politicians acknowledging that there is a problem. And now we got to get the plan adopted, and then part of local politics is allocating funds among many competing priorities, from public safety to libraries to driving and reckless driving and all the different public policy issues out there. So, but we need to, I think, make sure that climate change remains front and center and a top 5 priority for what we do.
Okay, thank you. I think we will now move on to close the questions and answers and move on to any final comment that each of our panel members would like to make, and also any action item they would recommend. And we'll begin with Representative Omokunde.
I was going to say that Ann had her hand raised before me, if she wanted to chime in, if I'm not overstepping my bounds.
No, that's fine. Ann's running the Zoom.
My hand was raised just because I was going to ask for action items so that we can make sure that our listeners have those and we can put them in the chat. Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, I'll start off with action items. One, like I stated before, and I think that Ted said it best. We have these elected officials, we have all these things on our plates, and these politicians, make sure that they're having the conversations that you want. Understand the relationship dynamic between yourself and people who represent you. They work for you, not the other way around. And make sure that we are talking about the things that you want to talk about. All these kitchen table conversations that you're having, that you have with your friends, that you have with other people, make sure that you're having them with us in many different forms. We got social media, we got Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. You can call us, you can email us, etc. Make sure that you and all of your friends are contacting elected officials, letting them know that this is what I want to see. I want more money for transportation and green transportation. I want more money for green jobs. I want to focus on a new deal that helps us economically as well as environmentally. Make sure that we know all of these things and be organized as you do it as well. And also, call them out and be the battery in the back. If you get an elected official that's championing your issue, show up to have their back about it too. As they talk about it, be the battery in their back to tell them when someone stands up on the table and kicks coffee cups over on your issue, make sure that you're there to support them on their behalf as well.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go on to Pam Rittger. Any action item you'd like us to take to heart?
Well, I would say, learn more about this plan and how you can provide feedback and and just continue to pay attention to, you know, what the eco office is doing and how you can really be a part of the solution and help to implement these plans. And, you know, as I just put into the chat, a lot of this, you know, unfortunately, a lot of our actions at the city continue to be constrained by what the state legislature is doing or not doing. You know, 8 years of, or 8 or 10 years of Walker administration really put us back. Wisconsin was a leader in energy efficiency and clean energy and all of that. And a lot of that, you know, a lot of our momentum was unfortunately reversed. So I think it continues, it continues, this having fair maps continues to be a really big issue, I think, in making sure that our government is actually representative of what the people of Wisconsin want, which I think is more and more, you know, environmental sustainable actions and climate action. So I would say, you know, continue to fight for those fair maps and true representation so that Wisconsin can continue to retake our place leading things, and you know, and our cities don't have to do everything.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Thank you. Ted Craig.
Yeah, I'm gonna say ditto in so many words. You know, just in case people haven't known it, this is really interesting. There's a scorecard on how cities are doing with their climate and equity action plans that rates 100 cities. And in terms of the public policy environment for cities, Wisconsin, in other words, like the disadvantages, right, to being in this state, Wisconsin is the worst in the country. We start further behind than any other place in the country than Wisconsin. That's how bad it is at the state level as far as the constraint on city and county activities. So we're up against a lot. And, you know, that said, I feel like things people are much more aware. There's a great effort going on. We're not where, say, Madison or Minneapolis are, though. We really do need to build more grassroots community support, more awareness for the benefits of addressing climate and racial inequality through serious plans that we act on. So we just need to be doing better given these constraints. And I think, and it's probably what Eric would say, but if you want to plug into one place, find out what's going on, get on an email list, be involved. The ECO website, the Environmental Collaboration Office website in the city page is a darn good place to start. And just be aware of it, come out, be involved, get other people involved. That's what we have to do. We need to get more like those places like Madison and Minneapolis that way.
Okay, thank you. Tell me, where is the scorecard available?
It's from the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. So
Okay.
ECEEE. If you go to their website, you'll see it very prominently.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mhm.
Okay, and we'll go to Alderman Nick Kovac.
Thank you. I think I'll give two broad possible action items. One is Eric and I and Ted and Pam have mentioned a little bit about the work groups within the task force. I'm not going to name all 9 or 10 of them, but there's been a lot of work, and Ted and Pam, I think, if they chair at least one now, and in the past they may have chaired or co-chaired 2 or 3 each. But there's the, you know, the task force is relatively formal. It's a formal creation of the city and the county, but then they created these still formal, but a little bit more informal, in that people are coming and going from those work groups all the time. You know, the task force members get appointed and have to get approved, but we then as a task force created these work groups. And so if you really want to get involved and really engage in some of these questions, join a work group. Call us up. You can call me up or call Marcelia Nicholson, who's the other co-chair, or any of these panelists here will tell you how to get involved. So we got a lot of citizens that start attending work group, or you could attend a work group meeting. They're all publicly noticed without joining. You could attend it once or twice, see if you like it. And we're about to issue this draft plan, but I think we still have many more months of work to do. So I would do that call to action, get involved at the work group level, specifically with the City-County Task Force on Climate Change and Economic and Racial Equity. And then the broader, if that's too much work, we're all a lot going on right now with in people's lives. I would say think a little bit more about our public spaces. And I mean this primarily from a transportation perspective, but a lot of times when people talk about climate change, you really focus on your household. There's a lot of talk of doing an energy audit on your house. Can I put solar panels on my house? What am I recycling? Am I composting? And that's all extremely valid, but I think that's out there and people are sort of aware that, you know, manage your own business before you make structural changes too, or do both at once. But I mentioned Capitol Drive before. We're trying to narrow Van Buren. We've narrowed Locust and North Bridges. When you're in that public space, that area, you leave your house and or your apartment building, and there's a sidewalk and a tree border and then a road. How wide is that road? How would you want that space used, both to get you around and to make your neighborhood feel safer and to affect climate change? Obviously, the wider we make the tree borders, the more carbon dioxide those trees are sucking out of the air. The more we devote the roads to public transit instead of cars, the more we're not just making our neighborhoods more livable, but we're combating climate change. So think about your public streets, and then if you have a great idea about how you'd want your street changed that you live on or travel a lot, contact myself, contact Representative Omokunde, Marcelli Nicholson at the county level. Let us know the changes you would make, because we have some federal money now, and we're committed to spending a lot of it on this issue. And there are climate change impacts to that as well. Thank you very much. Sorry, I went long
Thank
again.
you.
Sorry.
Yes, we have 2 minutes and a final comment from Mr. Shambarger, and then I will close with a few comments. Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I appreciate all of you taking the time out of your evenings to join us for this important issue. I mean, that's step number 1, is getting engaged. We have a lot of constraints at the state, and that is certainly true. But I wanted to the extent that you have networks that are beyond the city. I mean, I feel like the city, we've got to sustain a collaboration office. We are working on this. We have the county government is on board, but we have all these metropolitan, suburban communities within Milwaukee County that also need to be involved in this. Wauwatosa and Shorewood and West Dallas and Greenfield. I mean, to really have, we need you guys and women to help build a consensus first at the whole county level, and then moving out into the suburbs, into the state, that climate change, I think that impacts the city the most, but it is going to affect everybody. It's going to affect farmers. It is affecting suburban communities. And, we need to show that it's not just the urban communities that care about this, but the suburban ones and rural really need to also contact their legislatures if we're going to have build this consensus and drive action throughout the state of Wisconsin.
Okay, thank you. You answered a question that I was not able to ask, so that's just terrific. I want to thank all 5 of you for being on this program: Nick Kovac, Erick Shambarger, Supreme Moore Omokonde, Ted Craig, and Pamela Rittger. And please know, thank you to everyone who participated in the audience and submitted questions. This video has been recorded. This Zoom meeting webinar, I should say, has been recorded, and it will be available on the Milwaukee County League's website. And we will also post the actions so that we all have good directions for moving ahead on this plan. Remember, the League of Women Voters of Milwaukee County invites anyone to join, youth, women, and men. Finally, there are 4 regular elections coming up in 2022, 2 this spring, one on February 15th, another on April 5th. You can find candidate responses in their own words to selected league questions at vote411.org beginning January 27th. Those candidates' responses are unedited. Thank you again for joining this League of Women Voters of Milwaukee County Public Information Forum. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all you do.
You're welcome.